They say blood is thicker than water. But what happens when that blood turns to poison? I never thought I would be sitting here at 65, watching the sunrise from my own balcony for the first time in decades, finally understanding what it means to breathe freely. The salty ocean air carries no judgment, no demands, no subtle manipulations disguised as love, just peace. But getting here required me to lose everything I thought I valued most, only to discover it was never really mine to begin with. My name is Eleanor Vance, and for 38 years, I believed that being a good mother meant sacrificing everything for my son. I was wrong. The story begins, as most tragedies do, with the best of intentions. When my husband Robert died 7 years ago, I threw myself into caring for Ethan with renewed desperation. He was all I had left of the life we had built together. Ethan was 31 then, a talented architect with a promising career, but he had always been sensitive, easily influenced by stronger personalities. I told myself he needed me. When he married Jessica 3 years later, I welcomed her with open arms. She was beautiful, vibrant, and seemed to adore my son. The fact that she was a social media influencer with expensive tastes didn't concern me initially. Love, I reasoned, should be celebrated in all its forms. The first warning signs were subtle. Jessica would make little comments about my old-fashioned cooking, my outdated wardrobe, my lack of understanding about modern technology. She would laugh afterward, claiming she was only teasing, and Ethan would join in with that nervous chuckle that had replaced his genuine smile since their marriage began. When they suggested I move in with them to help with the down payment on their dream house, I felt needed again. I sold my modest ranch-style home, where Robert and I had spent 25 happy years, contributing $75,000 to their modern California paradise. I kept only what I needed and moved into the guest room, telling myself this was temporary, just until they got established. That was 2 years ago. The guest room became my permanent residence, and gradually, I became less of a family member and more of an unpaid housekeeper and ATM machine. Jessica's live streams grew more popular, and with them, her demands for a lifestyle that matched her online persona. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, weekend getaways to wine country, all funded by a combination of credit cards and subtle pressure on me to help out with just a little more money here and there. For her birthday, for a business investment opportunity, for a dental emergency that turned out to be cosmetic veneers. I watched my life savings dwindle while I cleaned their house, cooked their meals, and did their laundry. Meanwhile, Jessica would broadcast to thousands of followers about the importance of self-care and delegating household tasks, often with me visible in the background, wiping down counters or folding clothes. The irony was not lost on me, though I was too afraid to name it then. Ethan's transformation was perhaps the most heartbreaking part. The boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them roses had become a man who barely looked at me unless he needed something. He spoke to me in the same dismissive tone Jessica used, as if I were a burden rather than the woman who had worked double shifts to pay for his college education. I kept detailed records of every dollar I contributed, telling myself it was just good financial planning. The truth was, some part of me already knew I might need proof someday. The formal loan agreement I had drawn up with my friend Maggie's help when I first moved in seemed like overkill at the time. But Maggie had insisted. She had always been more practical than me, more willing to see people's darker motivations. Margaret Cho and I had been friends since our nursing school days. While I had focused on patient care, she had eventually left nursing to pursue law, building a successful practice representing people in difficult family situations. She had watched my relationship with Ethan and Jessica with growing concern, making subtle offers to help that I had always politely declined. The day everything changed started like any other. I woke at 6, made coffee for 3, even though I was the only one who drank it that early, and began preparing breakfast. Jessica stumbled into the kitchen around 10, her phone already in hand, ready to document her morning routine for her followers. She was talking about balance and delegation when she gestured vaguely in my direction, saying something about the importance of accepting help from family. The way she said family made it sound like charity rather than love. Ethan wandered in shortly after, kissing his wife, and ignoring the plate I had prepared for him 20 minutes earlier. That evening, they called me into the living room with unusual formality. Ethan was holding a folder of papers, and Jessica had that bright, fake smile she used when she wanted something expensive. They had a business proposition, they announced. A lifestyle brand called E.J. Lux Living that would capitalize on Jessica's social media presence and Ethan's design background. All they needed was $100,000 in startup capital, my entire remaining life savings. The presentation was polished, clearly rehearsed. They had charts showing projected earnings, testimonials from other influencers who had built successful brands, and a detailed marketing plan that included a European cruise where they would create content and network with potential partners. I listened in growing disbelief. This was not my frugal son speaking, but a stranger who had convinced himself that his mother's retirement fund was his inheritance to spend now. When I explained that this was all the money I had left, that I needed it for my own future security, Jessica's mask slipped entirely. She stood up, her voice rising to a pitch that made me flinch. She accused me of being selfish, of holding them back, of taking advantage of their generosity by living in their house while contributing nothing meaningful to their success. Then she shoved me. I had not been physically hurt by another person since I was a child, and the shock of it sent me stumbling backward into their glass coffee table. I felt something sharp bite into my palm as I tried to catch myself, and heard the crash of breaking glass as a framed photograph of the three of us hit the floor. What happened next was worse than the physical assault. Instead of helping me up, instead of checking if I was hurt, Ethan rushed to comfort Jessica, who was dramatically claiming that I had made her lose her temper with my stubbornness. He looked at me lying there, bleeding from the cut on my hand, surrounded by broken glass and the remnants of what I had thought was our family, and said words that severed something inside me more cleanly than the glass had cut my skin. He said I was always causing problems, always making everything about myself, and that Jessica was right. This was their time, and I owed them the chance to succeed. Jessica, emboldened by his support, delivered the final blow. She told me to find somewhere else to live, immediately. When I protested that this was my home too, that I had invested everything in their life together, Ethan said something about calling the police for trespassing if I did not pack my things within the hour. I drove away that night with 2 suitcases and a wounded heart, stopping finally in the parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart, where I sat in my car, shaking and trying to understand how my life had collapsed so completely. I spent that night in my car, too proud to call anyone, too shocked to think clearly. The cut on my hand had stopped bleeding, but it throbbed with each heartbeat, a physical reminder of how naive I had been about the people I loved most. The next morning, I found Maggie's business card in my wallet and called her through my tears. She listened without interruption, her lawyer's training allowing her to absorb the facts, even as her friend's heart broke for me. She picked me up within the hour, took me to her office, and began what she called damage assessment, while I cleaned my wound properly and tried to process what had happened. She made phone calls and pulled documents from her files. The news was worse than I had imagined. Ethan and Jessica were drowning in debt, having used credit cards to fund their lifestyle while they waited for their next source of income to appear. More concerning, Maggie had found evidence that Ethan had been using my name and financial information to explore loan options without my knowledge. But there was also hope. The loan agreement we had drawn up when I moved in was legally binding and included specific clauses about my housing situation. If they forced me to leave unreasonably, the entire amount would become immediately due, with interest. Maggie explained this with the satisfaction of someone who had anticipated this exact scenario, though I knew she had hoped to be wrong. The next few days passed in a blur of legal consultations, document reviews, and the strange process of learning to advocate for myself after years of putting everyone else first. Maggie was patient with my guilt, my second guessing, my tendency to make excuses for Ethan's behavior. She helped me understand that setting boundaries was not the same thing as being cruel, and that protecting myself was not selfish, but necessary. Meanwhile, Ethan and Jessica had discovered that my bank accounts were no longer accessible to them. Maggie had moved quickly to secure my remaining assets, freezing everything until the legal situation could be resolved. Their phone calls started within 48 hours. First, Jessica's tearful apologies, claiming she had been stressed and had not meant what she said. Then Ethan's awkward attempts at reconciliation, suggesting we could work something out if I was willing to be reasonable about the business investment. When gentle manipulation failed, the threats began. They would sue me for emotional damages. They would claim I had been abusing them financially. They would tell everyone how selfish and vindictive I was being. Under Maggie's guidance, I remained calm but firm. I was willing to meet with them one final time to resolve our financial obligations to each other, but only in the presence of attorneys and with all agreements in writing. The meeting took place in the conference room of their lawyer's office. A young man who seemed uncomfortable with the situation from the moment Maggie walked into the room, carrying a thick file of documents. Ethan and Jessica arrived looking confident, probably expecting me to cave under pressure as I always had before. Jessica was even live streaming outside the building, telling her followers about dealing with difficult family members and the importance of standing up for yourself. The irony was almost too much to bear. When their lawyer began presenting papers that would essentially forgive all debts in exchange for my signature on a non-disclosure agreement, Maggie calmly interrupted. She introduced herself as my legal representative and began laying out the evidence she had gathered. The forged loan applications, the credit card statements, the detailed history of my financial contributions to their household. Then, she presented the loan agreement from 2 years earlier and explained its terms in language that left no room for interpretation. $75,000, plus interest and penalties for early termination due to breach of housing agreement. Total amount due immediately, $110,000. The silence in that room was profound. Jessica went completely pale, and Ethan began stammering about how the loan had been a gift, how family did not charge each other interest, how this was not what anyone had intended. Maggie's response was measured and devastating. She pointed out that if it had been a gift, there would have been no need for the formal agreement they had all signed. She noted that the housing arrangement had been part of the original loan terms, making their eviction of me a clear breach of contract. She concluded by mentioning, almost as an afterthought, that she would be filing a complaint with the California Board of Architecture regarding Ethan's fraudulent use of my financial information. Their lawyer advised them to settle immediately. The house sold within 6 weeks. After paying off their debts and settling with me, there was almost nothing left. The lifestyle brand died before it launched, and Jessica's social media empire began crumbling as her perfect life narrative fell apart. I learned later that Jessica's wealthy mother, who had been secretly funding some of their expenses, cut them off entirely when she learned about the legal proceedings. Brenda apparently told Jessica that she had not raised her daughter to be associated with losers and failures. Jessica filed for divorce within a month, taking what little remained of their assets and moving back in with her mother. Ethan lost his job when the architecture board launched their investigation, And last I heard, he was living in a studio apartment and working as a drafting clerk. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only a profound sadness for what we had all lost through pride and greed. With the settlement money, I bought a small condo in a quiet coastal town 3 hours north of Los Angeles. It has 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and a balcony that overlooks the Pacific Ocean. It is the first home that has ever been entirely mine, decorated according to my own taste, filled with books I want to read and plants I enjoy tending. The silence here is not empty, but full of possibilities, of choices that are mine alone to make, of mornings that belong to me, and evenings that stretch as long as I want them to. I started volunteering at the local senior center, helping other older adults navigate financial abuse situations. My nursing background and lived experience with family manipulation make me uniquely qualified to spot the warning signs I had ignored in my own life. With Maggie's help, I established a small foundation called the Vance Project, providing initial legal consultation and support services for seniors experiencing financial abuse from family members. We have helped 12 people in our first year, and each success feels like a small redemption. The work is healing in ways I had not expected. Helping others recognize their worth and establish healthy boundaries has taught me to value my own journey toward independence. Ethan tried to contact me 6 months after the settlement. He sent a letter to Maggie's office, asking if we could meet to discuss our family relationship. The letter was full of apologies and explanations, promises to do better, and requests for another chance. I read it 3 times before I understood that my answer was no. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I finally understood the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. I could forgive the frightened, manipulated man who had lost his way, but I could not trust him with my heart or my future again. Some bridges, once burned, are not meant to be rebuilt. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to let the ashes nurture new growth instead. The mornings here are golden, painted in shades of possibility that I had forgotten existed. I drink my coffee slowly, watch the waves, and plan my day according to nothing but my own desires. Some days I read. Some days I walk on the beach. Some days I work in my small garden or video call with Maggie to discuss foundation business. Every day, I practice the radical act of putting myself first. The cut on my hand healed quickly, leaving only a thin, white scar that I sometimes trace absently while thinking. It reminds me not of the pain of that night, but of my capacity to heal from wounds that once seemed mortal. Yesterday, I met a woman at the senior center whose daughter has been pressuring her to take out a reverse mortgage to fund a business venture. The details were different, but the pattern was achingly familiar. The guilt, fear of saying no, the gradual erosion of boundaries, disguised as love. I listened to her story and saw my former self in her worried eyes. Then I helped her understand that protecting herself was not selfish but necessary, that real love never demands the sacrifice of one's security or dignity. She thanked me with tears in her eyes, and I realized that my pain had been transformed into purpose. The sun is setting now as I finish writing this story, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that no photography could capture. The ocean stretches endlessly before me, vast with promise and possibility. I am 65 years old, living alone for the first time in my adult life, and I have never been happier. The family I thought I needed to complete me nearly destroyed me. But in learning to save myself, I discovered something more valuable than their approval. I discovered me. Tomorrow, I will wake up in my own bed, in my own home, surrounded by my own choices. I will make coffee for one and drink it slowly, watching the sunrise paint the water gold. I will plan my day according to my own wishes and measure its success by my own standards. And for the first time in decades, that will be more than enough.